From the virtual stage of the 92nd Street Y, hello and welcome to our civic series, Race to City Hall. My name is Seth Pinsky and I'm the CEO of the 92nd Street Y. I'm honored to be here to host these one-on-one conversations with leading mayoral candidates, covering topics of importance to all New Yorkers, including some suggested by members of our 92nd Street Y community. Thank you all so much for joining us. As we all know, the last year has been an incredibly difficult one for our city. To overcome our challenges, New York is going to need a decisive, collaborative, and creative chief executive. It is for this reason that we at the 92nd Street Y have launched this series. Today, I'm speaking with mayoral candidate Ray McGuire. Prior to joining the race, Mr. McGuire had a 36-year career in the financial services sector. Most recently, he served as Vice Chairman and Global Co-Head of Investment Banking at Citigroup. And before that, he spent time in various investment banking roles at First Boston, Merrill Lynch, Wasserstein Perella, and Morgan Stanley. Mr. McGuire, thank you so much for being here and talking with me. Mr.
Pinsky, Seth, thank you very much. I am honored to be with the people of the 92nd Street Y. You guys have done such an extraordinary job. I will tell you that in looking at what you've done, I've looked at the 990s, I've looked at your impact report, I've looked at the financials, I've looked at the determination letter. It is one of the best run organizations that exist in the city and quite candidly anywhere. So I'm honored to be with you.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. And before diving into some policy topics, I wanted just to take a minute and ask how you and your family have been faring during the pandemic.
It has been hard, but we have tried to recognize all the protocols and we're holding up well. We're holding up well, thank you. We're trying to keep safe. We're trying to keep well. So we're fortunate. We are very fortunate.
Well, I'm certainly glad to hear that, and I wish you and yours only the best.
Thank you.
In anticipation of our conversation, and for the first question, we asked members of our community to send us questions that they'd like to hear you answer. And among the many responses that we received, one theme that clearly animated a lot of people was the time that you spent in financial services. What was interesting, though, was that how our community members viewed your career was definitely not uniform. And in fact, it neatly split our community into what I would say were two camps. In the first camp, there were people who asserted that the city today is a mess, vital services are being delivered poorly, the budget is bleeding red ink, the economy is in shambles. And so according to these people, we need a non-politician CEO from the private sector to come in and whip the city and city government into shape. And your candidacy offers exactly that. The second camp, on the other hand, was filled with people who asserted that while the city may be a mess, the last thing that we need is a wealthy mayor who can't possibly understand the plight of average New Yorkers, and even if he could, who would have no experience managing a highly unionized bureaucracy or navigating the political waters in City Hall or Albany or Washington. So I guess I have two questions for you. One is, what makes you believe that now is the time for a businessman mayor? And two, how would you seek to persuade the people who fall into that second camp, which presumably represents a significant percentage of the Democratic primary electorate, to give you a chance?
So let me start with a second, because I think it's important for the electorate to know what I've done, which is going to bring the experience that is necessary to lead and to manage this city. But equally as important, Seth, is going to come down to who I am. And I think when people Google me, they see what I've done. What does not come out is who I am. And let me tell you a little bit about that. Who I am is a young man from the other side of the tracks, the other side of the tracks in Dayton, Ohio. I grew up across the street from the Howard paper mill. It sometimes used to emit fumes that were so strong that the only way that we could breathe was to open the refrigerator door. I grew up with a single mother who, along with my grandparents, raised me and my two brothers. I didn't know my dad. My mother was a social worker. And at any one point in time, we had half a dozen foster children in our home. And so I know what it's like to have my mother debate whether or not she's going to pay the Dayton Power and Electric bill, whether or not she's going to put food on the table, whether or not she's going to pay the rent, or whether or not she put tithes and offering into the church. I know what it's like to wash tin foil. I know what it's like to, when you get to the ends of the bars of soap, to put the soap together and so that you convince yourself that you have a full bar of soap. I know what it's like not to have. I know what it's like to live from paycheck to paycheck. I know what it's like that my mother sacrifices beginning through the course of my life, but I remember education being so critical to my mother and my grandparents. And in the 5th grade, I'd done well enough so the teacher called my mother and said, they built a school in the suburbs, and I think that he should apply for that. You all should apply for that. And we had no money, but we applied, and through financial aid and through scholarship, and I must say scholarship because there was no financial aid that was available, I was able to go to this school from 6th grade to 11th grade. In the 11th grade, I had a 4.0 average. I averaged 28 points per game playing basketball, and I was president of the school. And there was a teacher there, Robin Melnick, who said, if you're as good as they say you are, why don't you go test yourself against the big boys and girls in the East? I said, where are they? And so she gave me a list, and I took a Greyhound bus around New England by myself at 16, looking for education, looking for the big boys and girls in the East so I could go compete. And I landed at a school in Lakeville, Connecticut called Hotchkiss. And I had a 3-piece suit. The reason I tell you that was all polyester, and these kids had on those shirts that had alligators on them, which cost more than my entire wardrobe. And I did okay. I did well enough there to apply to colleges and was able to get a scholarship and got into 6 colleges and decided to go to Harvard College, and then went on to law school and business school, all on financial aid and scholarship, and all on working, because I had to work when I was younger to make certain that I could help out at home. So for those people who ask the question, they should first understand who I am and the sacrifices that got me here, coming from the other side of the track, getting here through education, and me wanting to make certain that other children in New York City get the same opportunities that I had through education. So I came to New York with 3 things. I had a great education, I had a lot of debt, and I had no money. And that then begins at least what I am or what I've done. And prior to that, let me tell you, New York is a place where I met my wife, where we are raising our 3 children. Leo is 8, Ella is 18, she just finished her college applications, and Cole is 20, and Cole was fortunate to be drafted into the NBA this year. He's first round draft choice, and now starting point guard for the Orlando Magic. I love this city. It's given me everything. And this is the baseline. So this is who I am. The highest priority for me is first my family, my 94-year-old mother, and my 95-year-old mother-in-law, who, by the way, was able, while she is in New York with us, to get her vaccines, and my mother, who's in Ohio, still waiting. And so this has been a walk of faith. And how did I get here? The 4 things is prayer, preparation, performance. And then when you come from the neighborhood, you got to have a little bit of paranoia. So for those who ask the question, this is who I am. I know what it's like not to have. And it's the foundation that is me. That's what I guess they now call my lived experiences.
Well, let me ask you this, because clearly you have a background in the world of the have-nots. And unfortunately, in New York today, we have more and more have-nots. We have an economy that is sputtering. We're down about 500,000 jobs from our high. We have an unemployment rate that's nearly double the unemployment rate of the nation as a whole. It's now at about 12%. We clearly need to figure out how to restart the job machine and get people back to work in order to make sure that more people fall into the have column rather than the have not column. So I guess my next question is that if tomorrow were the mayoral election and you won, and you were to take your seat in City Hall the day after that, what would be the first 3 things that you think you could do that would have the biggest impact on getting the economy started again?
So let's talk a little about what I've done in response to that question to address those people who say that we do need someone for the experience. of having managed through a crisis who managed budgets. And I managed budgets that's sometimes bigger than state budgets. And I managed budgets from the depth of the financial crisis when, as you know, Citi was on life support. So take my foundation of recognizing and acknowledging every single day of what it's like not to have, and then come to this situation where we're managing three crises: the crisis of COVID, the crisis of the economy, and this crisis of racial and religious segregation, all of which hit us at the same time. It's a nuclear hit that we need to grow our way out of. And to your question about what do I would do? Well, we got a budget deficit. And so we need to understand how we manage that budget deficit. We've added $12 billion worth of expenses since 2016 at 33,000 employees. It looks like we're going to have support from the administration, from the Biden administration, where I have great relationships, to make certain that we continue to get our fair share. I will make certain that we protect the core services. Quality of life is going to be big, and that's one of my pillars. We can't sacrifice safety and clean streets and public spaces or mass transit. I will create a sustainable approach that we can balloon in good years and slash programs in the bad years. That is something that we need to focus on. And I will use my business experience to make certain that we do, as we look at this budget, Seth, you got to streamline. So I'll look at the non-essential costs. I'll look at some of the zombie programs that are great for PR and they get funded, but they are just not appropriate. You can't sustain them. I'll look at those, and then I'll look at the tax base. But what comes with looking at the tax base is making certain that the core services and quality of life are protected, which is, I'm going to look at this. So by my first 100 days, it's going to be focused on the three different pillars. It's going to be on the economy, which is jobs, and my economic comeback plan, what I call the McGuire comeback plan, which is designed to be the largest, most inclusive, most effective comeback plan in the history of New York City. And then it's going to be safety, security, and quality of life, and then it's going to be education. So I'm going to focus on those three. But let me tell you what I'm going to do to move this economy, to bring this city back. Got to focus on jobs and the economy. My go big, go small, go forward. Go big means that I'm going to create 500,000 jobs focused on building the infrastructure. And we have federal dollars allocated to this. Given my relationships in Washington and in New York, I've been a longstanding supporter of the Congress people, the congressional representatives, the senatorial representatives, the two senators we have. And I think some people will remember when they saw her at the 92nd Street Y, I introduced Vice President Kamala Harris to New York. So we have relationships across the leadership of the party, across the leadership of the American financial system. We have those relationships. So I'll bring that to bear. And my jobs plan is to infrastructure, fix the sewage mains and the fractured bridges, build truly affordable housing. And also, it is going to be so critical today to build the infrastructure of the future when it comes to technology. Not only do I want to bridge the digital divide, which today is so pervasive and so profound, I want to make sure that we have the technology infrastructure for this to be the epicenter of technology for this country. Partnering with the technology community, making certain that we get firms like Rigetti, which is in California here, supercomputing. So I want to focus on that. And then Andrew, and then Seth, I want to focus on the small businesses. And what I want to do with small businesses, they're 50% of the employee base in the city. And I have what's called a jobs accelerator. Immediately, I want to get 50,000 of the small businesses and pay for 50% of their wages. So I'm going to give wage subsidy so they can keep working. They can employ, and then those employees can be available for earned income tax credit and child credit. So those are the things I want to do. That's number one. Number two, I want to make certain those small businesses get relief. And what I mean by relief, sales tax relief, so they can use their sales taxes. Then I want to make certain that I was out talking to small businesses, and what are they concerned with? They said, Ray, listen, we pay Con Edison 100 cents on the dollar and we make 10 cents on the dollar. We need relief. So I would intervene to give relief. I got to be sensitive to Con Edison, but I got to be sensitive to giving a lifeline to these small businesses. And I also to make certain that we give some rent relief in negotiating with the landlords, but I got to be sensitive to the landlords also have to pay their bills. I need to balance that equation. I know how to do that. And then I want to make certain that I involve myself in all the fines that many of these small businesses have gotten. especially in the hospitality industry. 45 different fines from 7 different agencies. It is not working. And then I want to make sure that I invest in what I call the comeback banks. These are the local financial institutions that can invest in these small businesses. And at one point I thought loans were going to be important, but no, they have too much debt. I want to give them grants and I want to give them equity. And I want to make sure that I work with the credit agencies to make sure that they get some relief on the credit scores. That's going small in my go big strategy to rescue the lifeblood of the city, which are the small businesses. And then I have a plan to go forward, and going forward is investing in those communities that have been left out. Minority women-owned businesses, and now we have fortunately included LGBTQ community in that, and make sure that they get the right representation, $20 billion worth of procurement, that we focus on that. And I also want to focus on workforce training. Many of the jobs that were the jobs of yesterday or today are going to be displaced. I want to make sure that we take those people, $100 million, invest in 15,000 people to make sure that they have the tools to participate in the mainstream economy as it develops into a digital world. So that's my economic plan. Go big, go small, go forward. It is outlined in my rayformayor.com website, so you can see it all, learn a little about who I am and what I've done. And by the way, look at the track record of what I've been able to accomplish. You don't last in my job, which is the longest standing head of banking in the history of Wall Street, if you can't manage the budgets. I manage over 50 budgets, so I know how to get this done. The track record of what I have done is trustable. You can trust it and verify it, which is what the city is looking for.
Let me ask this, though, as a follow-up. I spent a fair amount of time looking through your comeback plan, and I've also spent a fair amount of time looking at the city's budget, and you made reference to both of those. And one of the things that strikes me about the budget is that the mayor's own budget projections show that from the first year that you put forward your own budget, if you're elected, through the entirety of the projection period, which is 2025, they're forecasting $4 billion plus deficits. And if you read the analysis of groups like the Citizens Budget Commission, they'll tell you that that $4 billion is really $5 billion. So all the things that you talk about seem really important. And the plan that you've put forward is clearly very detailed and very specific. But there's a lot in it that proposes additional expenditures. You talked about the wage subsidy to small businesses. You talked about the sales tax holiday, the holiday from fees for permits and licenses, the financial relief to landlords, the subsidies for affordable childcare, spending more on infrastructure. I mean, all very important priorities. But in a zero-sum world where we have deficits as far as the eye can see, where are we going to get the money to pay for all of this?
So great question. Having managed all these budgets, you need to figure out where you're going to get the dollars to invest. You should also look at the result of the streamlining that exists in the budget. In a $92 billion budget, the result of having gone through and been more efficient, the efficiencies come out to be somewhere in the $700 million range, all of which has to do with debt service reduction. So it is not clear to me, given that we have increased the run rate by $12 billion in the past 4 or 5 years. There's clearly efficiency there. So one, I'm going to look at the efficiency and go through and look at non-personnel costs. And as I said, some of the zombie projects that exist, that's number one, which I know there's some efficiencies there. Number two, to the extent that we need to raise taxes for those people who can afford it, people like me, then we're going to have to do that. But what comes with that is to make certain that we maintain quality of life. If we can give people the quality of life and they believe and trust in the leadership, that we're going to have people stay here. So we can neither tax nor cut our way out of this. We have to invest and we have to grow, which also means that I'm going to have to bring the business sector in. So I have to have public-private partnerships. So what are my sources of funding? My sources of funding for some of the programs that I'm talking about have already been allocated by the federal government, and we can go and make the case quite confidently and quite effectively to Washington about that. They've already allocated a lot of dollars to what I'm talking about, especially on infrastructure. That's number one. Number two, we're going to have to figure out what we can do here to manage more efficiently. And number three, I want to make certain that we can develop public-private partnerships to invest in areas. We have one of the crown jewels of this city that is completely underleveraged, the New York EDC, Economic Development Corps. And some of these projects they can help support. We got to grow our way out of this. We cannot cut our tax away out of this, notwithstanding what the current nomenclature is. It's not possible. I know how that works from the depths of the financial crisis. You got to make investments. That's where we've began to grow. If the only thing you worry about is cutting and taxing, we can't get our way. That's not the comeback that I'm describing. And the other part to this, where I can get funding, is I look at the capital budget. I look at the constraints that exist here, the relationship between what's in the operating budget and what's in the capital budget. And I can go to the rating agencies and, based on my track record, talk to the rating agencies about what we can do on the capital budget side. We have capacity there, unused capacity there. I won't tap in all of it, but there's enough there to make sure that we can jumpstart this economy. And I will do that in the first 100 days. And I know how to do this because I know what the levers are, because I've done it before. And I've done it in a way that if I hadn't done it every year, I wouldn't have lasted for 13 years. It's not an election, not a popularity contest.
Well, let me ask this, picking up on your point about the importance of growth and investment. Over the last decade or so, prior to COVID, New York City's economy was humming. We were at an all-time high in terms of employment. For the first time in decades, we were generating more jobs each year than the nation as a whole in terms of percent of total employment. But it turned out that the economy was good at certain things and not so good at other things. And what it was good at was generating a lot of jobs. And it was good at generating high-paying jobs for a certain segment of society, mostly high-skilled or highly educated people. And then for almost everyone else, it was actually very poor at generating high-paying jobs. And so as a result of that, we've had yawning inequality in the city. And what that in turn has resulted in, at least from my perspective, is that we're increasingly becoming a city. And even more than that, the Democratic Party in New York is increasingly becoming a party that seems skeptical about the benefits of growth and development. We saw that with Amazon's attempt to build a second headquarters in Long Island City. We saw that more recently in Sunset Park with the Industry City project. And on the campaign trail, you've talked about not letting projects like that die on the vine. But obviously, as you know, as mayor with as much power as you don't have the power to just put these things forward by fiat. You have to work with the city council, you have to work with the electorate, sometimes you have to work with Albany. So I guess my question is, if you were elected, how do you think that you could successfully convince these bodies and the electorate more generally that we need to do more investment, we need to have more growth? And just as importantly, what would you say to the business community about how they have to change the way that they go about proposing investments and growth in order to help make your job easier?
So let's be clear about what has not happened. What has not happened is that those who are most affected, those who would have been most at risk of being displaced, were not at the table. The community wasn't at the table. There have been large-scale projects where a year in advance, the community's input was sought and the community was at the table. For HQ2 in Industry City, you didn't have the right representation at the table. And so the people who are responding to what has taken place over the past decade or so, let's call it the past 6 or 7 or 8 years, where many in the economy have gone backwards. And you will note that prior to George Floyd and COVID, I wrote a note that said that the impact of those people who had been left out, systemic inequities in education and healthcare, in the economy and in criminal justice system for the past 20 years have resulted in $16 trillion impact, negative impact, that we could have added to the U.S. economy, to the U.S. GDP. I've also went forward and said that, the study went forward and said that if we address it today, that's $5 trillion to the U.S. GDP. My economic plan is the most inclusive. Why do I say it's the most inclusive? Because it has not been included. Many of the people who you were describing weren't included. I got a $20 billion procurement program The number of people who are involved in that $20 billion procurement people who are MWBEs is pretty de minimis. You got a construction goal of 8%. We are now at 0.5 to 0.7%. So I can understand clearly why people don't feel that they've been included. You know why? Because they haven't been included, which is why I have committed to making this the most inclusive economic comeback in the history of this city. And once you do that, once you focus on that and make it a priority across the agencies, some people say that they're going to hire this person, that person. I know how to do this because I've invested in small businesses. I've helped small businesses grow, either individually or make certain that institutionally that we focus on this. And what will the business community have to do? The business community, as I've encouraged them right at the time George Floyd hit and we saw that 8 minutes and 46-second murder, that and COVID, I said the business community has to invest here, not a relatable, heart-rendering note to the community, but actually put dollars in the community. Summer jobs, and want the business community to step up and help me with summer jobs so that every child in New York City from 14 on, whenever from sixth grade on, to the extent that they can, if they want a job, they have a job. Because I had a job. I dug footers. I laid tile. I changed bedpans. I DC'd IVs. I built boxes in the basement of Phil's dress shop. I was a gopher. You know what? I put the check in the bank and I had a little passbook savings account and it did a little click. And what came back was I looked at the passbook savings accounts and there was a little more money in there and I can help out at home. And I felt good about myself and it kept me out of trouble. Private sector's got to step up here as well. This is our city. I'm the person who can bridge that divide. I speak the language of the streets and the language of the suites. And we're going to need that because otherwise what you just outlined, people feeling excluded, they are right. They have been excluded. That can no longer exist. Stock market's going way up and I got a $4 billion budget deficit for 3 years on the way. And so you have to have somebody who can bridge that delta and bring the city together.
And let me just put my cynic's hat on for a second and put myself in that second camp of people that we talked about at the beginning. What makes you so confident that what the business community needs to do, the business community will actually do? Because the business community wants to be here. The business community needs to have a leader in whom they trust, who's got a track record that is verifiable by the business community. They need leadership. The business community needs leadership. And the business community recognizes that it has been alienated from the conversation, but they also understand that they're at risk. Businesses want to be in New York City. This remains the greatest talent pool that exists anywhere. One of the biggest brands that exist anywhere in the world is building a headquarters in New York City. So I know I have factual evidence, having talked to many of the business leaders in this city, that they want to be here. There's no other place like New York City. I understand there's a draft New York movement going on around the country, in Florida, in Texas. Come on, man, ain't none of them got Broadway. None of them got the Botanical Gardens. None of them got Yankee Stadium. I mean, they got some stadiums, but come on. This is a whole different world. They don't have the cultural institutions. Go through local arts organizations. Go through the big ones. Nobody on the planet, and I've been fortunate to visit all these cities. None of them this is New York. So I get all the chatter. We need leadership here, and people will stay. They want to be here. This is it. You make it here, you've made it. This still remains the aspiration around the world. I got to get to New York. You get to anywhere in America, you got to get to New York. So you mentioned the cultural sector. That's a good segue to the next topic that I wanted to cover with you. You've been involved with the cultural sector for many years. You're on the board of Lincoln Center. You're on the board of the Whitney. You're chairman of the Studio Museum in Harlem. And so you know very well how the COVID crisis has devastated this sector of the economy. When I look at our sector of the economy at the 92nd Street Y, the arts, entertainment, and recreation sector, we're down about 68% in employment. We were at the low, we were down 68%, whereas the economy as a whole was down about 20% in terms of jobs. The rest of the economy has recovered about 30% of what they lost. We've recovered about 5%. So it's been really, it's decimated the sector. That being said, as we've been talking about, we're in a period of crisis on so many different fronts, whether it's unemployment, crime, the public school system, homelessness, racial injustice. So I have two questions for you. One is, do you think that the arts and culture and education sectors are sectors that we should be prioritizing now? If so, how do you convince the general public of that? And second, what specifically would you be doing to help the sector as it begins to recover?
So the answer is arts are essential through every crisis that we've had in this city. Mostly every crisis just anywhere. Arts have been the great convener. They've given us hope. And the arts that I'm describing are arts that are not only with the large culturals who are well managed and well resourced, like the 92nd Street Y, but many of the local arts organizations that give kids exposure. We've cut it out of schools. We need to have arts education, which is so fundamental. When arts education, arts, cultural institutions to thrive, because even in those moments of despair, artists in the art world can bring us together. They can give us hope. Think about the most difficult moments that we've experienced. Give me a little art, give me a little music, distract me, give me a coloring book for a child, give me an instrument, give me a piano. Just think about that and give me something off or on Broadway. Give me a garden that I can walk around. Give me a zoo. That changes my perspective on things. It gives me a little hope. And so, yes, arts and cultural institutions are fundamental. They're starving today. And so we need to make certain, again, through public-private partnerships, and you all have that. And as I said, I've looked through your material and you're well-resourced. And even though you're struggling, even though you're well-resourced, but just think about your impact report. Think about how you've gone out and changed people's lives just through art and all that representation. We need to focus on the arts, and that will be a high priority for me. You've referenced some of the boards in which I sat. You know, Arts Connection was one of the first one. Harlem School of the Arts is one. The International Center of Photography. Fortunate to be on the board of the Whitney. Fortunate to chair the board of the Studio Museum in Harlem with the great Thelma Golden there. Sat on the board with Ellen Fudd of the Museum of Natural History. These are critical to the city. What Thelma Golden is doing at the Studio Museum, what taking place in the Brooklyn Museum, was taking place at the Whitney and others. And that these are great institutions. We need to invest in them, and they need to spread out and provide arts education. And we also need to invest in the 70 some odd business investment districts that we have to take it local so that they can make certain that they create programs that we can put at the library. I also sit on the board of the library. Use the branches in the library, use the faith-based community, use to the extent that there's a community center. We need to invest in those community centers, use it there. I was just recently at the Boys Club at 112th Street. What an extraordinary program that changes these kids' lives. And yes, there's art there, so they can participate in that. Art is fundamental. And we need to figure out whatever resources we can do. The budget's been cut back. You figure out whatever resources we have today to invest in the arts, because if you got nothing else, you got a little art, you can change people's lives.
And so what form would some of those investments take? Again, coming back to this question about the budget, how do you find those additional resources for the arts when there are so many other priorities? And how would you deploy those resources, or what else specifically would you do for the arts and culture industry?
So listen, you got the Department of Cultural Affairs. I would direct each agency to designate staff to integrate arts and arts education across the agencies, because that's so fundamental. And I would also work with the culturals like you to make certain that we had coordination to see how we couldn't leverage some of your programs to make certain that we couldn't spread them out. Again, this is another area of collaboration between the public and private sector. We can find the resources if we're appropriately organized and if we have the right vision. I know we're in the middle of despair. I get that. I get what it's like. Again, I know how that works, but I also know to give us hope and promise that if we come together, we can get this done. So Broadway, how do you go and help finance Broadway? Well, you need to give grants. You need to give grants. And we can do that. There, as I go through and prioritize in a budget that has got a deficit to it, I know that there's a way for us to come up with the resources to invest in art. I know that, having managed as many budgets I've managed, a $90-some-odd billion budget that has done a $12 billion run rate increase in 4 years, guarantee there are efficiencies here that are more than the $700-and-some-odd million efficiencies that come from debt service reduction.
I wanted to touch on a couple of other topics that were suggested by our community. And the first of those, you mentioned education and the public education system specifically. I personally give Mayor de Blasio credit for pushing as hard as he has to open the schools for elementary students and now for middle school students at a time when a lot of other mayors in other cities have not been able to do that. With kids who are roughly the same age as your son, I've seen just how difficult remote learning can be and how ineffective it can be. I'm wondering what you would be doing if you were in office now. Would you be pushing to open more schools? And what do you think the obstacles are to doing that, if you think that's important?
So let me tell you, education is, as I've outlined, is a key pillar to my vision. And what I've outlined and what will come out in detail is my cradle to career vision of the city. And what do I say cradle to career? Because pre-K is fine. I think pre-K is important. You need to preserve pre-K. I want to be clear about that. What happens is by the time many of our children get to pre-K, they're already behind. So I want to start at zero, because as these children are developing their learning, I want to make sure that they have the right affordable child care and that we have the right care for the parents and the toddlers so that they will continue to learn. I want to make certain, Seth, that by the end of the third grade, and I want to be held accountable for this, by the end of the third grade, every child in New York City can read. Why is that? Because between 0 and the end of the third grade, our children are learning to read. They're learning to read. After that, they're reading to learn. And if they never learn to read, the societal impact is what we're experiencing today. It's joblessness, it's hopelessness, it's all of that. So we have to make certain that by the end of the third grade, our children know how to read. And to the extent they have come up short, I want to have a tutor corps that makes certain this happens during the course of the summer. And then I want to make sure that at the beginning of the 6th grade, all of our children have access to different career opportunities. They can become coders, they can become welders, they become software engineers, they can become botanists, they can become whatever it is that they like to become. They can become a teacher, they become a nurse's aide and turn it into a registered nurse. I want to expose them to the opportunities early, and maybe for when it comes to technology, earlier than 6th grade. And then I want to make sure that they all have a job. Private sector, public sector. Remember, one of the first things that got cut in the mayor's budget when they came out was we're going to cut summer programs. So I cut summer program. I got no laptop. I got no tablet. I got no access to broadband. I got no rims and nets on the court. What do I have? Nothing. Hopelessness. So I want to make certain that we give our children summer jobs so that by the time they graduate, they can do one of 3 things. They can go to the job access available because of the private sector, and they can go into either 2-year or 4-year college. But they have promise. They have a skill set, and we need to increase the graduation rate. Today, as you know, 16 to 24-year-old, many 16 to 24-year-old Black and brown kids, they're 2.5 times to be disconnected, which means out of school, out of work, no job. 2.5 times that of white and Asian Pacific Islanders. We have to intervene today to give those kids some hope. And some kids just may not want to go to be an electrical engineer. I'm okay with that. At least we've exposed them and kept them in school and kept them engaged and given them some promise. And education should not be determined by zip code. We got to take education to our students. We have to do that. It cannot be today the way it is. 3rd through 8th grade, proficiency, Black and brown kids, 67% below proficient in English or math. 67% of that demographic is below. Future shouldn't be determined by a zip code. We have to intervene today.
Well, let me ask one question though about that. Why do you think that hasn't happened to date? What do you think the obstacles have been, and what gives you confidence that you can overcome them in a way that others previously haven't been able to?
You know, there are a whole host of obstacles. We spend $25,000 to $28,000 a year on per student, and probably 10,000 that actually gets to the classroom. We need to focus on the principal. There's a triangle here, right? There's a teacher, there's a child, and then there's the parent or the caregiver. That triangle has been somewhat breached, and so we need to focus on that triangle. You got to focus on quality education. It's not clear why it hasn't happened. There's been a lot of discussion about it. We've gone backwards. In today, that gets amplified by what you've talked about at the COVID generation. Without access to broadband, digital learning, we've gone from in school to out of school. We've lost an entire group of children. And yes, we do need to get these kids back in school, and we need to make certain that we have it with all the appropriate protocol, COVID protocol in place, because we can't put them at risk. But the numbers show that kids in school are going to be okay. You got to make sure you get the right vaccines and the right testing, but get those kids back in school. We don't have a plan to remediate. There's a whole bunch of PR about it, but these kids are suffering, and we need to intervene. I'm going to intervene day one. I got to get the economy done. I got to make certain these kids are getting educated, and I got to make certain that there's quality of life. Those are the priorities. I get that done, which I'm committed to getting done and can get done based on the things that I have gotten done. We can move this city forward. Without any one of those three things getting done, you're going to have that draft from New York program to wherever they're going. That's going to become even more robust. I want to keep people here.
Let me focus on then the last area that you talked about as your initial focus, and that is quality of life. And I want to turn specifically to another one of those very difficult topics that gets discussed a lot, but that seemingly nobody has quite figured out how to solve. And what I'm speaking about specifically is crime and policing. And in today's discourse about policing, it seems that there are two distinct challenges that are described. The first is that we have the issue of police abuse and the disparate impact that this has on certain populations, most specifically on Black and brown men. And then the second is that we have the issue of rising crime. As you know, murder was up 40% last year. Shootings nearly doubled last year. So we clearly need to solve both of these issues. But the way that these issues seem to be discussed today is that we're almost presented with an either or alternative. Either we can address police abuses or we can drive down crime, but we can't do both. And on the campaign trail, you've taken a different view of this. You've spoken about your own experience with police discrimination. I was struck by the story that you told in the New York Times the other day about your experience going to shoot your first campaign video and having you and your driver pulled over by a police officer. So clearly you understand the issue on that side. But you also speak of the importance of getting guns off the street and in an era of defunding the police, giving additional resources to the police. So I guess I'd love to hear from you in more detail how exactly, given the challenges that we've had in actually accomplishing these two goals in the past, how you think that you can overcome those challenges and actually do something on both fronts.
So you're right to reference the incident that occurred when we were shooting my launch video. That's just one incident. You have to understand, when I walk outside of my apartment, there could be another incident, and the reaction to me as a 6'4", 200+ pound Black man is just that. They have no idea who I am or what I've done. That's how I profile. Even when I dress up and go into a department store, I'm going to be one of three things. I'm going to be men's suits, I'm going to be security, I'm going to be where's the restroom. And so that's factual, and we have to begin to address that societally. And I've talked about this, and I've talked about it, and I'll talk about it here. What we need to do here is, with respect to the police, we're often asking the police to deal with situations for which armed response is not required. I'm not for defunding. I'm for restructuring the police. You said giving more resources. I'm for shifting the resources to social services. I want to put them to mental health and homeless professionals so the police can focus on the core of what they do, which is fighting crime. It shouldn't be that anything that happens 9/11 that we ought to call the police. It's just not That's not appropriate. We got to sift some of the responsibility from those interactions that the police have to social workers, healthcare specialists, civilian staff. It's not only good for the communities, it's also going to help police officers focus on real public safety issues. We need to, the culture of the police needs to change. And I've outlined a plan that's called RAP, respectful, accountable, and proportionate. We need to restore some respect because today that respect doesn't exist on either side. And how are we going to get there? One, accountability. We've seen how many of the abuses people are putting into the police are not held accountable. So we need to address that. We pay $200 million a year to settle incidents by serial abusers. We can't do that. So we need to have accountability. And proportionality means that it's been said if the only thing that you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. In Black and brown communities, it's a sledgehammer. So you have to get rid of that. So I would reallocate, restructure so that the funds that exist there, it's a $5+ billion budget. If you add all the benefits in, it's $11 billion budget. Let's reallocate some of those dollars to social services, to mental health care professionals. 4 out of 10 calls that go to 911 happen to do with mental health issues. Let's put the mental health care professionals in with the police. Let's look at the community-based organizations that keep people out of trouble. I talk about what happens at the 92nd Street Y. Talk about what happened at the Boys Club, keeping people engaged and out of trouble, giving them something to do and a place to go. And then I want to make certain that as we do that, that we also invest in the violence interrupters that exist in these communities who are on the ground, who know who the bad actors are. We know where they are and we know who they are. Let's invest in those organizations. And then what we need to do, Seth, is we need to return to community policing. It used to be the case that Officer Nunez said, Ray, this is all very interesting, but I see you're not behaving, and I'm dressing up the language. You can either listen to me and start behaving, or I'm going to call your mother. But you know what? We all knew each other. And there was the ultimate authority that was respected. We need better policing. We need better policing. We need to reallocate, restructure, and instill a culture of respect, accountability, and proportionality. And once we get to accountability and the community sees that those serial misbehaviors who've abused them have been held accountable visibly, then you'll begin to restore that trust. Until that, it's going to be a real challenge.
Thank you for that. And we've been talking about a lot of very weighty topics. And I wanted to end by moving from policy to a quick question. We're running short on time, but I wanted to ask you a quick question about personalities. And specifically, one of the things that struck me when I was in city government was how much at the city level actually depends on the state. And one of the big challenges that our current mayor has had is dealing with the authorities in the state and specifically with the governor. And so I just was wondering, and our patrons were wondering, how would you approach that relationship and what gives you confidence that you'll be able to navigate that more successfully?
So as I've told you, I've known the congressional leaders for a long time. I've known the senatorial leaders for a long time. I've known the governor for a long time. And others have said they know the governor's brother. I know the governor's brother too. So we have relationships across the board. That relationship would be a relationship of respect and admiration. I admire what he's done, and I respect what he's done, and I would expect the same in return. But I want to be clear about something. This is all about New York. So I will go and fight in any corner, in any room for New York City. That is my first priority. It is what's in the best interest of New York City. So respect and admiration, yes, but be clear about my agenda. It's about New York City. I don't want anybody to get confused. I want to be bright, clear, and unequivocal in every quarter. I'm here to represent, lead this great city. That's my agenda. Remember, I didn't get termed out. I'm not looking for a promotion. I quit my job. I called my 94-year-old mother and said, I quit my job. She said, boy, you have lost your mind. What is going on? And I explained to her, as I've explained to you, why I'm doing this. There's no other person who's got the lived experiences, who's got the leadership experiences proven, who's got the relationships to be able to work with, negotiate with Washington, Albany, and New York City. Nobody's got the same kind of breadth and depth that I have. Nobody.
Well, thank you so much for that. There's so much more to discuss, but unfortunately we are out of time. I appreciate your sharing your plans for the city very much with us. To our patrons, thank you for supporting and continuing to tune into Race for City Hall. Please check back on our website for the most up-to-date schedule of future conversations. And in the meantime, from the virtual stage of the 92nd Street Y, we're signing off. We appreciate your joining us, and Mr. McGuire, we appreciate your participating. Thank you so much.
Go to rayformayor.com. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.